Hello, today I thought I'd give you an overview of my Replication Specialist Pauper Commander deck. Okay, so for those not aware, Pauper Commander is a variant of Commander where the commander has to have been printed at uncommon. Doesn't actually have to be the uncommon printing, it just has to have been printed at uncommon at some point. And every card in the deck has to have been printed at common. Same rule applies there. It doesn't actually have to be the uncommon printing in the deck, it just has to have been printed at common at some point. Which is a departure from regular Pauper, which requires you to actually have the common printing. But we're not playing that format, so we don't have to care. So with that said, here is the commander of this Pauper Commander deck, this PDH deck. And it is Replication Specialist. 4 and 1 blue, flying 3/4 with the ability, whenever a non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 on a blue. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. Now, people who have been around for a while may recognize that effect as literally Mirrorworks, but colored, which is kind of cool because Mirrorworks, it's a nice card, but in regular Commander, you often want to spend your mana on other things, and on its own, it's 5 mana that does nothing. It's a combo piece that requires literally anything else to function. But in the tests I've done with this deck, it seems quite nice. Right, now onto the actual deck. So, first off, we have non-artifact creatures. Vidalcan Surtark's nice. He's a little bit of control. The Metalcraft trigger isn't hard to get. He's just kind of low-key good. Then we have the Sage of Latnam, we may notice is an uncommon. This guy has actually been printed at common, uncommon, and rare. In, I think it was Antiquities, the original set he was printed in, where he was a common. Then he got reprinted at rare in 8th, I think it was, 8th edition. And now we have an uncommon printing as well. So interestingly, that up until that recent printing, you couldn't have used him as a commander. He could have only been in the deck, even though he'd been printed either side of uncommon. Then we have Vidalcan Engineer, who just is basically a mana dork. Trinket Mage, another one where it was originally printed at common and then printed at a higher rarity. Trinket Mage is decent, fetches a lot of things in the deck. Probably fetches an artifact land though, because artifact lands with that ability are pretty good, because you play the land, it triggers the ability, and then you can tap the land to pay for half of the ability and then another one for the other half. And out of that, you get a token that's a copy of the artifact that isn't tapped. So it's actually net zero on how much money you have access to, which is very nice. If you can get a thing to bounce the one of the artifact lands, it is quite tasty. Then we have Gearseeker Serpent, 7 mana with affinity for artifacts, and a 6 mana can't be blocked, 5/6. It doesn't actually say affinity for artifacts, but that's affinity for artifacts. It just wasn't printed in a set where they had affinity for artifacts, or in one of the automatically eternal sets, like Modern Masters or whatever, where it would have been affinity for artifacts. But that's affinity for artifacts. Affinity for artifacts. It doesn't really do anything smart. It's just to win con. You hit them in the face for 5, and that is all that does, which is sometimes all you need in Pauper. Then we have Ulamog's Crusher, who is probably the best creature in the format. It doesn't go particularly well in the deck, but like it is one of the biggest threats in the format, and I happen to have a bunch of them. And yeah, I mean, I know I previously said that Annihilator sucks to play against, and that's why my Mail of the Anima deck doesn't have any Annihilator in there, but that deck doesn't need it. I feel like Pauper, the power level is such that that thing either dies or you win the game. And it'll probably do that without the Annihilator. I know I'm trying to justify it hard, but what you gonna do? Probably kill spell it because it's got no protection. Anyway, moving on, we get to creatures that Replication Specialist could duplicate. Therium Sculptor, 2 mana, 1/2. That makes my artifacts cheaper. It's just good. Fairy Mechanist, a 4 mana 2/2 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them, put it into your hand, and put the rest on the bottom in any order. It's just good. It's a body. I could duplicate the body if I need to be when it enters. And I also get the trigger twice of digging for more fuel. It's just good. Mirror Shell Crab. There's not really a lot to say about this one. It's the channel ability is nice. I said it's not really a lot to say, and then it proceeds to say a lot about it. 7-drop is kind of expensive, but board 3 on a 5/7 means that people are not getting rid of this easily. And the channel to be able to discard it to counter a spell is quite nice. And also the fact that it can counter abilities, that's quite rare. And also theoretically recurable in this deck because there's a few ways to get things back after I channel it. Then we move on to colorless artifact creatures, starting with Perilous Mere, who is a nice, cheap, colorless, recurable shock, which is just good. Then we have Mere Retriever. 2 mana, 1/1. When Mere Retriever dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, which I'm sure I don't need to explain why that's good. Then we have Ornithopter of Paradise. It's a mana dork. 2 mana, 0/2, flying with add 1 mana of any colour. It's basically a colorless Birds of Paradise merged with an Ornithopter. Silvermere, 2 mana, 1/1, mana dork, taps for blue. Alloymere, it's a 3 mana, 2/2 mana dork. Mostly it's just a mana dork. Yes, and that one was originally printed at Uncommon, and then this actual printing is from Jumpstart, because I couldn't. This is one of the few cards I had to order in for this deck because I couldn't find where my original Alloymeres are. I'm pretty sure I have a few, but I couldn't find them. Like there's about 30% of this deck that I had to order in. But mana dork's always nice, and Alloymere is kind of cute. Then we have Boundary Inspector, who is just a 3 mana version of the Vidalcan dude, whose name I've forgotten already. Just my artifacts cost less. It's like a better mana dork. And one downside with the mana dorks with Replication Specialist is I can't tap them to pay for their own activation cost, or to pay for the activation cost of duplicating them, because of course summoning status, which unfortunate, but you know, can't have everything. And the mana getting the mana that I turn afterwards is quite nice. Workshop Assistant, it is a slightly more expensive Mere Retriever, which is quite nice to have more than one of those. New York Replica, it's Unsummon on a Stick. Quite nice. 3 mana, 1/4, Unsummon on a Stick. Wizard Replica, a 3 mana, 1/3 flying that is a mana leak on a stick. Well, not quite a mana leak, but close. Frogmite, it's a 0 mana, 2/2. Not the most exciting, except for a free 2/2. Then we have Ancestral Statue. It's a 4 mana, 3/4 golem. When it enters the battlefield, return a non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. Now, that sounds like a downside until you realize that it can allow you to bounce a thing so that you can recast it again and duplicate it again. So there is a kind of, it's a mana intensive combo, but it is essentially a combo that you can continue turn after turn, where you cast it, it enters the battlefield, you stack the triggers, so that one resolves second and that one resolves first, and then you can duplicate it, and then you have the duplicate return the original, and you have the original return something else that you want to duplicate. And then at that point you've essentially paid 6 mana to get a copy of one of these out and to bounce something else. It just gets you a lot of juice, which is quite valuable, because otherwise you could be running out of things to do with your mana quite easily. Then we have Ancestral Statue's bigger brother, the Guardian of Cornelius. The Guardian of Cornholio. And this one differs in that you're allowed to bounce an artifact land. And unlike Ancestral Statue, which you can bounce the Ancestral Statue with itself, the Guardian of Kalatos, you actually have to do it as I originally described, where the token bounces the original, and the original bounces something else that you want to duplicate. I have had games where I basically won because I was just making an army of golems and constructs, just turn after turn, and also I was duplicating mana by duplicating an artifact land while I was at it, which, yeah, pretty nice. No one disrupts that. That is quite a nice combo. Then we have Shardalin Dragon. It is just a big flyer that I can duplicate. There is absolutely nothing smart about that one. It is just a dragon. Now, unlike the last deck that I showed off, this deck does have a lot of supplemental set things in here, but you know, you got less options in Pauper. Spire Golem. It's a theoretically free 2/4 flyer. It's a 6 mana affinity for islands. Now, this deck doesn't have probably as many islands in it as it should to have something like this in here, but it's mostly islands, so it's probably going to cost like 3 or something. It's probably not worth dropping some of the other lands that are in the deck just for the sake of making this guy cheaper. Then we have Cogwork Archivist. 6 mana, 4/5 reach that can put things from my graveyard back into my library, which can be nice. But he's also quite a big reach dude, which is quite nice. Then we have a 7 mana 4/4 with affinity for artifacts, which is probably not free, but probably very close to free. And I do prefer the other artwork for Mere Enforcer, because it's kind of, the other one's friend shaped, and this one's kind of pointy and scary. But when I was searching my spares, that was the best condition one that I found, because all my mirrored and stuff that I've got is well played. And next we have Sojourner's Companion. It's Mere Enforcer but better, because it's got artifact land cycling, which is just so good. Also, look, it's an axolotl. Isn't it cute? Look at the little axolotl. Then we get on to the equipment. Got a Dark Steel Axe. This isn't the common printing, but it was printed at common. It wouldn't be in the deck if it wasn't. Then we have Dark Steel Axe's more destructible brother, Bone Splitter. It's also got a cheaper equip cost, which is nice. Near Hover Sail, it's just flying. Evasion is nice. Bladed Pinions. Oh, what would you know? It is more flying. Also First Strike. And it only costs 1 extra mana to cast. Whereas the Hover Sail was 1 to cast, 2 to equip. This is 2 to cast, 2 to equip. Then we have the Nurok Stealth Suit, which predated Shroud as a keyword. It's just kind of good. 2 mana, equip creature, Shroud, double blue, attach it to something at instant speed. Single colorless, attach it to something at sorcery speed. Giving something Shroud at instant speed is kind of nice. For people aware of the cycle, this isn't the most powerful on the cycle, but it is still very nice. It's probably the second most powerful, or at least as far as like controlling the game goes, because you can just protect anything at instant speed. The black version wins you the game. That protects your game. Then we have Whisper Silk Cloak, and it is actually the common printing of it. I prefer the artwork on the other printing, but I couldn't find any of my copies of the other printing, and this one, it's got some nice nostalgia to it. 3 mana, 2 to equip. Equipped creature has Shroud and can't be blocked. Then we have Strider Harness. 3 mana, 1 equip, +1/+1 haste. Haste is nice. Sickle Slicer. It is a grizzly bear with equip 4. Then we have Wayfarer's Bauble. We're now getting onto the non-creature, non-equipment artifacts. And Wayfarer is just good. It's essentially a 3 mana colorless ramp, which for 3 mana and the commander, I can get 2 of those, and then probably crack one of them and crack the other on the turn afterwards. Like Synth Wellspring. 2 mana artifact. When it enters or is put into the graveyard, you search for a land and put it in your hand. It is quite nice. I don't have many ways to trigger the death trigger on it, but there are a few, and it's probably still worth it without that, with all the duplication of it I can do. Next we have Everflowing Chalice. It is probably the only artifact in the deck that I wouldn't consider duplicating. I would just pay the kicker cost again. Beyond that, Everflowing Chalice is quite nice. Then we have Thought Vessel, which is probably one of the most expensive cards in this deck, just because of how little it's been printed. And this version is the Warhammer 40k version, as you can see. It's just good. And if you haven't been able to tell, we're in the Mana Rocks section. Then we have Guardian Idol. Unfortunately, it enters tapped, so it can't help to pay for its own duplication, but it's pretty cheap and it can become a dude if I need it to, which is quite nice. And also, just more Mana Rocks is good. Darksteel Ingot, the 3 mana indestructible Mana Rock. Pristine Talisman, the 3 mana mana rock that gains you life when you activate it. Sisay's Ring. It practically pays for its own duplication, though kind of not, because it doesn't give you blue, but you can probably spend that other colorless on something else. And yeah, 4 mana for 2 mana is kind of nice, and also it is very shiny. It's like one of the few foils in the deck, which is quite pretty. Then we have Golem's Eye. It's a functional reprint of Sisay's Ring, because why not have 2 of them? Then we have Meteorite, the most expensive rock in the game, but also it doubles as removal. And for 7 mana, 1 of which can come from this, and leaves you with 1 mana left over, so kind of, but not really 5 mana. You can do 4 damage split between 2 targets, which is really nice. That deals with a lot of things in the format. Then we have an 8th Spellbomb. It is unsummon, or it is a card. Flight Spellbomb. It gives a thing flying and probably gets you a card, which is nice. Conjurer's Bauble. It does a thing and draws you a card. Let's be real, the first off, no one really cares about it. It is just a card. Echo Wellspring. Same again. It is cards. The Death Trigger, it's hard to trigger. Same with the other Wellspring, but it's still worth it. Darksteel Pendant. For some reason, it wasn't printed with Scry 1, even though it's the set that introduced Scry. The Oracle text to Scry 1, they went back and changed it to Scry 1 after the fact, but for some reason, they only had Scry at Scry 2 when it was originally printed, which is weird. But, you know, what are you going to do? An indestructible source of Scry 1. Gundra's Capsule. 2 mana to play, 2 mana to sack, get 2 cards. Alternatively, you pay 8 mana total and get 4 cards, and you can split that cost across 2 turns. Golem Foundry. It's 3 mana. When you cast an artifact spell, you put a charge counter on it, remove 3 charge counters, get a 3/3 golem. It is quite nice. You can assemble quite a nice little golem army with this, especially if you've got one of the golems that can bounce itself. Yeah, you can get a lot of golems that way. Then we're on to the non-permanent section of the deck, starting with Deprive. And Deprive is just counterspell that has an additional cost of bouncing a land. Now, the deck doesn't actually have counterspell in, and you may be asking why, and the answer to that is because the additional cost of bouncing a land, there's a high chance that I have an artifact land, and bouncing the artifact land so that you can play it again is not a downside. That is very much upside there, because that you just play it again, you duplicate it again, and then you are like up a mana. It's actually good. And we have Into the Royal, kind of basic. Bounce a thing, draw a card if you kicked it. Then we have a foil Aether Tradewinds, one of the few foils in the deck, because, you know, it's a PDH deck. You'd probably want to be doing it on a budget. Aether Tradewinds, 2 and a blue, return target permanents you control and target permanents you don't control to the runner's hands. Very nice. Ghostly Flicker, same cost as the last card, but instead exile 2 target artifacts, creatures, and all lands you control, and then return those cards to the battlefield under your control. This is technically the most viable card in the deck. I can't call it the most expensive though, because I pulled this in a booster years ago, and at the time it wasn't worth anything. It is also notable in that it's one of the few flicker effects that doesn't give the things back to their original owner. It gives the things back to you, which is very nice. I don't have many ways to abuse that last part, because if you use a temporary control effect on something and then you ghostly flicker it, you get to keep it forever, which is very nice. And more relevantly to this deck, you can pay the mana to duplicate them again. And this is an instant, so for 5 to 7 mana, you can suddenly functionally have 4 extra blockers, or some other bullshit. It's so many opportunities for bullshit. It is just really good. And then we have Gitaxian Probe. Yeah, Gitaxian Probe is just good. Serum Visions. Draw a card, scry 2 for 1 blue. Ponder. 1 blue, look at the top 3 cards of your library, rearrange them, you may shuffle, draw a card. Brainstorm, the broken version of Ponder, although you don't get to shuffle. Then we have Deep Analysis. 4 mana, draw 2 cards, 2 mana, draw 2 cards, 6 mana, draw 4 cards. Then we have Preordain. It's Serum Visions, but with the text written in the opposite order. Then we have Thoughtcast, which is actually the most expensive card in the deck as far as money that I spent on it goes. But that's because it was easier to get the foil than the non-foil for reasons I won't get into here. And for what I was getting, I was going to have to pay shipping anyway. So, like, yeah. But anyway, about the card. It is their attempt to fix Ancestral Recall. So, of course, it is broken as hell. 1 mana, draw 2 cards, providing you've got 4 artifacts. Then we add on to the lands, starting with the fetch lands. Terramorphic and Evolving Wilds. Terramorphic and Evolving Wilds being functional reprints of each other. Sack them to get a basic and tapped. Then we have Grixis Panorama, Esper Panorama, Bant Panorama, and Warped Landscape, which are all very similar to each other in that you pay an activation cost and you get an island, and they tap for 1 colorless in the meantime. And honestly, after the playtest that I did with this deck, I find myself not cracking them most of the time because I don't care about getting the colors, and I'd rather use the mana that turn than spend the time pulling another land out of my deck. But the option's there, and pulling more lands out of your deck is always good. Then we have Ash Barrens, who is an honorary member of the Fetch Land Club because it's got basic land cycling. And yeah, it is kind of functionally the same as the panoramas, except you have to make the choice before you play it rather than after. Lonely Sandbar, same thing. Downside is enters tapped. Scaling Cascade, it's quite nice. Enters tapped, which is not so nice, but stopping a thing from untapping is nice when it works. Halmar Depths, probably the best of the tapped spell lands, because it is kind of functionally Brainstorm. Soaring Seacliff, again, but with flying. Then we have Seat of the Synod, probably the best land in the deck, just because you can duplicate it with the commander, and the result of doing so is mana neutral. The worst thing Seat of the Synod can do for you is come out before you've played the commander and require you to bounce it to do the bullshit with it. Darksteel Citadel. It is like Seat of the Synod, but it doesn't tap for coloured, and it's indestructible. Quicksand. it's a kill spell on a land. The only downside with this deck is with it being mono blue, I can only run 2 of the 12 plus existing artifacts. No, not 12. The 10 dual cold ones, the 5 original Darksteel, 16 plus, because I think there's 1 or 2 other artifact lands that I'm not remembering. Yeah, I could have 16 artifact lands, but I only have 2. Woe is the color identity rule. Haunted Fengraf. It is another spell land that can let me return a creature from my graveyard to my hand. At random, but it's probably something I want or can use. Glimmerpost. It gains me 1 life, maybe more, probably just 1, and it taps for colors. Then we have an Urzatron. What more is there to say? It's an Urzatron. And we have basics, and I'm not going to go through all of them, just the pretty ones, but we have a pair of stained glass islands. Then we have Zendikar full arts, more Zendikar full arts. I dropped 1. Yeah. And then we have a selection of nice foily lands, and then some generic ones. And yeah, that's the deck. There's a few cards that I have sitting in the side that I kind of want to try and fit in, but also kind of don't. There's a Perilous Mere sitting by the side because I accidentally put 2 of them in the deck and realized while I was arranging things for this video. So that's good at least. There's a Stoic Rebuttal that used to be in the deck, but you know, that one is actually strictly worse than Counterspell, unlike Deprive, which has situational uses better than Counterspell. Mere Servitor, which I thought would be funny to try and get to use, but is actually not that good. Then there's the actual correct rarity Trinket Mage, although I kind of prefer the other artwork. Mnemonic Wall, whatever. Mnemonic Wall, which is quite nice. It's Archaeomancer, but can block. And Bonds of Quicksilver, which is just blue removal. Anyway, if you like the video, press the like button. If you didn't like the video, feel free to press the dislike button. It's all engagement, so it's all good for me, and it indicates your preferences for me to make more videos like this or not. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. I mean, if you got this far with listening to me ramble about magic cards, then you're probably into that sort of thing, so subscribe because there's going to be more of it. And thank you for watching.